Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolfuk again. Wolfuk the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolfuk to midfield. Miles Wolfuk with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Now, one fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Sam Howe showing the toughness for 6. Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Goes to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll it apart. Now he's going to throw it and score! Christian May throws it to Payson in the end zone for the touchdown. They are throwing a lucky left-handed. Was rolling out on the run and threw it left-handed. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys on a Monday night. And if we're coming to you on a Monday night, usually that means it's a good thing here when it comes to these official visits and everything that's going on. These are going to be the typical days where we're hoping to get commitments, where we're hoping that we're walking into Carolina landing some guys, and that's what you're getting here today. Carolina ends up landing a commitment in the 2027 class, this time along the offensive line, and it's their first commitment along the offensive line in this class. So we're going to break that down for you guys. We're also going to talk about some of the news and notes that are coming out from around the group that was on campus over the weekend. Plenty of notes that are coming out from inside Carolina that we got, and a couple of other notes that are being posted as we speak. And so those are certainly something that we need to get to. We need to break those down, and then we do have a couple of guys that are expected to be midweek visitors. One of them now not expected to take his official visit. The other one is expected to be on campus midweek. So we're going to tell you about those guys, ultimately where Carolina stands with those two guys here. So lock in here on this edition of the podcast tonight. But as I mentioned, let's start out with the commitment that Carolina landed earlier today. That would be Lauifi Tosi that Carolina ends up picking up along the offensive line. He committed after visiting over the weekend, commits to Carolina over the other three schools, that he was officially supposed to visit. Was supposed to go to Sacramento State this upcoming weekend, Idaho, June 11th, and then was expected to be at Stanford June 19th. As of right now, it appears that all of those official visits have been canceled and that he is locked in and ready to go with the Tar Heels. Tosi is a 6'4", 320-pound offensive lineman who is set to play his final season at Millennium High School in Goodyear, Arizona. He is rated as the number 1,533 overall prospect and the number 137 interior offensive lineman in the 2027 class, according to Rivals Industry Rankings. This past season, he played both sides of the line of scrimmage, finishing with 8 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks, and did earn first-team all-conference honors as an offensive lineman, which was the side of the ball where he really shined. This is a guy that, Carolina jumped in on back in March. Didn't really know a whole lot about him coming into the week. And then he ends up popping up on the radar. And all of a sudden, Carolina ends up hosting him for an official visit. He was one of the guys that, to be honest with you, I didn't really think stuck out quite like some of the other guys that were on campus in terms of the star rating and everything like that. So I didn't know how much of a focus this would really be for Carolina, but clearly they showed him everything that they needed to show him. This is a guy that is, bordering on being a power conference type of player, really bordering on even being a FBS type player with Sacramento State and Idaho going after him. But at the same time, Carolina clearly values him. They did a really good job of showing that to him over the weekend. Good job by Bill Belichick, as well as Michael Lombardi. Both of those fellas taking a picture with Tosi. You can see that if you go over to our article that we have written about him over there on the website at heeltoughblog.com. Those guys clearly heavily involved in this. Will Friend along the offensive line also too, probably a big say in landing this commitment for Carolina. And so, when you look at it, what is he ultimately bringing to the table? Why did Carolina want this guy so much? Well, he's a run blocking specialist. That's the main thing that I think really sticks out when you watch him on film, is that he consistently wins his one-on-one matchups. When he's, going against some of these smaller edge rushers, he does a really good job of driving those guys back off the line of scrimmage. It'll be interesting for me to see how it translates when he moves inside to guard, if he moves inside to guard. I mean, it's 6'4", 200 or 320 pounds. You would imagine that's a guy that eventually they'll probably look to transition into there. I think with some of the issues that he has, with pass protecting against certain guys off the edge that are a little bit quicker, certain guys that are off the edge that are a little bit squattier or bendy. Those are probably going to be guys that are going to give him issues. And so the way to really, take that out of commission is to put him inside, let him play on the interior. And I think, the question's going to be, does he have enough physicality to be able to play in there? I think that some of the flashes that you see on film, you see that. He has, some moments where he's able to stack up the pancake blocks. For me, it's, nice upper body strength, but is it going to be the type of dominant upper body strength that you're going to need from a guy that's ultimately going to be on the interior? I think that's something that we're going to have to see as time moves along. In pass protection, one of the things that I liked is I thought he moved well for his size, but as I mentioned, quick and bendy edges are probably going to give him some issues at the next level, which is why he probably, won't end up sticking at tackle. You never know. Typically, guys of this size are probably going to move inside, but you never really do know, especially if he's going to be a guy that plays early for Carolina. If they want to take some of the weight off of him a little bit, thin him down just a little bit, and maybe see if that allows him to be more successful, they could end up keeping him at tackle. But I would be shocked if he's not a guy that eventually moves inside to the interior offensive line. With him, I think one of the things that really you got to start by looking at is that Carolina's got so many other offensive line targets in this class that this is not going to be the headliner that Carolina is going after. This is not the guy that you're going to look back on and say, man, that was the number one guy for Carolina in that recruiting class. If you do, then there's probably going to be some issues. I don't think that's necessarily gonna put the taste in your mouth that you're hoping for from a Tar Heel perspective. But I do think that, once you sort of, bring him into the system, let him grow up a little bit, there are some things to really like about him. First of all, the size, that's something that you just can't teach. For him to have that size already be at a size that should be able to contribute sooner rather than later at the college level, I think is encouraging. But again, my thing is going to be, does he have the level of physicality that's needed on the interior to be able to make an immediate impact? I think this is more of a long-term pickup for Carolina. I think they're looking to bring him in and develop him. But this is where you've got to just trust in Bill Belichick and Michael Lombardi. And I know for some of us that may be very difficult. I'm one of those people that so far, judging off of what we've seen from the first year and a half of Michael Lombardi and Bill Belichick, I don't know how much I trust their evaluation skills. At the high school level, I think what they were able to bring in here in the 2026 class, I think you really like. You feel like there's a lot of guys that fit exactly what you're looking for from a Carolina perspective, not only from, the star rating, but also, from the positions of need, from the high motor, that you see a lot of guys on the defensive side of the football bring. And I think that is something that you're looking for this time around as well, is are they going to find some of these guys? But they're looking more for diamonds in the rough, it feels like, with this group. There were some guys that were a part of this past year's class that I think were probably looked at as diamonds in the rough as well, but you had the headliners, and maybe we're going to eventually get those guys. But right now, when you look at Tosi, I don't think that is exactly what Carolina fans are looking at as a headliner. And even the guys that Carolina has in place, Chuck Roberts listed as a 3-star in this class. I mean, there are some things that you really like about him, but is he a guy that you look at right now and say that should be Carolina's top commit? Probably not. You're probably hoping that Carolina within the next week and a half or so can maybe pick up another commitment that at least rivals that even if he doesn't end up being a 4-star prospect, you can at least hold in high regard. Tasheem Butler, we'll talk more about him when we get near his official visit. He's a guy that, as of right now, don't know if he's going to end up staying committed to Carolina. He's got 2 official visits that he's going to be taking elsewhere. So Carolina's going to be looking to hold on to him. Then you got Skylar Robinson. That's the only other guy out of the 6 that Carolina has that's ranked inside of the top 1,000. Isaiah Stevens just jumped into the top 1,000. So let me correct myself there. But Skylar Robinson, a guy that, I got to be honest, I have no idea what to make of his recruitment at this point. Doesn't appear that he's going to take any official visits anywhere else. But, is a guy that isn't taking an official visit to Carolina as of right now, from what we know. And so, with him, that leaves that a pretty, cloudy recruitment that Carolina has going on there, a pretty cloudy commitment that they have on the ledger. And then Isaiah Stevens, that's a guy that you probably feel the best about. I think him and Chuck Roberts are probably guys that you feel best about right now. Chuck Roberts just on campus this past weekend. He doesn't look as if he's going to be taking any official visits anywhere else. So he looks like he's locked in. And then Isaiah Stevens. But, then you're talking about 2 guys that are outside of the top 1,000 that make up the rest of this recruiting class for Carolina. So finding those headliners, I think that's the next step for the Tar Heels in this recruiting class. But you like that they end up landing a guy along the offensive line, guy that has a little bit of versatility that they can use, probably moving forward, especially if he's able to stick at this weight, maybe lose a little bit of weight if they want to put him at offensive tackle. But this is definitely a guy that I think for Carolina, is a nice starting point, is someone that you're hoping turns into something, but you're hoping this is just the beginning with him. All right, we move on to the news and notes that are coming out from around the first weekend of official visits. And, this is a group that really grew as the week went along into a pretty sizable one that Carolina had on campus. I think at the end of the day, it was 11 or 12 guys that Carolina had officially visit campus over the weekend. Now, there are, some conflicting reports on what Amari Patterson was doing on campus, the 4-star wide receiver that Carolina just recently offered. He is maintaining the fact that he was not on an official visit. He was just there to visit a guy that he went to high school with this past year, and Cornell Warren, who's a member of the team. He plays down at Bluffton High School. He's originally from Ridgeland, South Carolina, but Cornell Warren was his wide receiver opposite of him last year. There are, sources that are telling Inside Carolina, though, that that's not the case. He did go through the official visit stuff, and that was an official visit that he took to campus over the weekend. So, that's a weird situation. I would say if you're reading into that, that probably means that he's not going to end up committing to Carolina. I mean, if he's so staunch in saying that it wasn't an official visit, I really think that shows you that he doesn't really have much interest in the Tar Heels. And they were further back in his recruitment anyways. It was probably going to take a miracle for Carolina to be able to land him. So that one, probably no sweat off the back of a guy like Bill Belichick. That's probably no shock to those guys that he isn't going to end up ultimately committing to Carolina. But some of the other guys that were on campus this weekend, one other guy that was not really quickly is Sincere Wilkerson, the interior offensive lineman out of the state of Florida. He was not on campus over the weekend. Not clear as to why exactly he wasn't on campus, but he is expected to reschedule. So that is big for Carolina. Just another guy that Carolina is looking at along that interior offensive line, a guy that Carolina was positioned very well with for a very long time. Feels like they're still in a really good spot. I don't think that him not making it to campus over the weekend was something that should be concerning if he's going to reschedule, but will certainly be something that we will monitor here over the next handful of days and weeks until he does reset that official visit. One guy that Carolina really holds in high regard, one of the top linebackers that Carolina is going after, Zyke Scott. He told Inside Carolina that as of right now, there is a 1A and 1B in his recruitment. It is Carolina and it is Georgia Tech that are at the top right now. Those are the two teams battling. Of course, he is expected to visit Colorado as well, but we'll see if he ultimately makes that trip. Regardless, this is going to be one of those knockdown dragouts, I think, to the end. Carolina not securing the commitment, I don't think is the end of the world here. I think he's a guy that probably is going to drag out his recruitment a little bit more. And will ultimately come to a decision after the month of June is over. So I don't think you should read into that. But the one thing I will say is that Georgia Tech now has a chance with the two teams, even as of this moment, has a chance to pull ahead of Carolina when they host him later on this month. So that will certainly be something to monitor, see what happens after that official visit, follow some of the quotes, and then ultimately see whether or not Carolina feels like they've got the advantage there. That would certainly be a big commitment for Carolina and would be one that would, rival Chuck Roberts. I think he would actually, in terms of overall rating, overtake Chuck Roberts as the top overall commit for Carolina in the class. Regardless, really talented player, and I think that's one that Carolina fans should definitely be hoping ends up committing to them when it's all said and done. Jaden German, the three-star cornerback, was impressed by being able to talk with Bill Belichick. He told Inside Carolina, there was an article that they put out earlier today, that he could have spent plenty of time talking to him just about football. I think this is classic. This is one of the things that I think Bill Belichick is going to be able to do just as well as anybody. He just wants to sit down with these kids and talk football. And, just from listening to him on the Pardon My Take podcast, listening to him in some of the other spots that he's done over the years when it's come to just talking about the X's and O's of the game, this is a guy that knows more than just about anybody. And those Super Bowl rings that he has, all 8 of them, prove that that is the case. And so I think in that area, you feel really good about what Carolina is going to be able to do. From that perspective, but you have to have guys that are really infatuated with that part of Bill Belichick. It all, the money is going to be important. There's no doubt about that. And hopefully Carolina has the funds. I think they do, based off of, what we're hearing. They should have the funds to be able to pay these guys. It's just, we were wondering, would he be able to connect with these guys at the high school level? I think for the guys that really love football and this is their true passion, a guy like Bill Belichick is going to be able to connect with them. For some of the other guys, it might not nearly connect as much. But yeah, when it comes to sitting down, talking X's and O's with Bill Belichick, there's very few that are going to be able to match him in that area. And so with German, this is, I think, a quintessential response after you take that first visit. I think Carolina's, in the running. Do I think that they've pulled ahead in this recruitment? No. But I think they are in a pretty decent spot. They're going to have to outshine a school like Minnesota, who, really impressed him back during the spring. There are a couple of other visits that he has scheduled as well that I think are going to be ones that he will look at and probably value as well. So I think there's a good chance that Carolina is in the running here, but I think the thing that you're not hearing from him that you would have liked to hear from him is that Carolina is either the leader, Carolina is has done something to separate themselves from a couple other schools or something like that, similar to what you heard with Zyke Scott. You didn't hear that from German, so that'll be a guy that we'll monitor moving forward. But it could just be a complete toss-up as of right now going into the rest of his recruitment. Elijah Garreton, the three-star defensive lineman. This is another guy, added his name late to the ledger for Carolina over the weekend. And, when he was thrown out there, probably a guy that, we looked at and didn't really think Carolina had a great chance with. But as he sit here now, I think the fact that he told Don Callahan of Inside Carolina that the Tar Heels have moved into that top group for him, I think that is encouraging for Carolina. Again, this is one of those guys that I've talked about this a lot here. When we've talked about recruiting and some of the guys that Carolina is bringing in on campus, the guy that's from the New England area, Warwick, Rhode Island, went to Bishop Hendrickson High School this past season. And so, this is a guy that probably is very familiar with Bill Belichick, very familiar with what he was able to do with the New England Patriots. And so this is going to be one of those guys that I think is going to be worth monitoring over the next handful of weeks. Do I think that Carolina, it's clear that they didn't necessarily separate themselves, but coming into this visit, I didn't really know if Carolina was a serious contender. Now they look like they are a serious contender, even though this is one that they jumped in a little bit late on. He, I believe, was one of the guys that got an offer back in April when he took a visit to campus. So Carolina jumping in a little bit late here, but it seems like they've made up a little bit of ground. Teams like Florida, as well as Penn State, are some of the schools that have been trending well for him, according to Rivals recruiting prediction machine. So that is certainly one of the guys that I think you look at and you say, if Carolina can end up landing him, again, guy that's rated outside of the top 1,000, but you got to watch the film, I think would be a guy that would grow on people at Carolina, or fans of Carolina. The guys that are recruiting him currently, I think you feel pretty good about him. But look, he's a guy that I think when you match up against Penn State, Florida, it's going to be tough. And Carolina's got to be able to stand out, hopefully this weekend, went a decent ways towards actually doing that and putting him not only in that top schools group, but maybe has them in first place, something that he might just not want to say outright to Don Callahan. Some of the other updates that Inside Carolina had: Nori White will take his official visit to James Madison before making a decision. That trip will take place on June 19th, the weekend of June 19th. Nori White's a guy that Carolina, once they offered him back in the spring, they really took control of his recruitment. But I think James Madison, you look at that school, what they've been able to do at the group of 6 level, ends up making the college football playoff this past year. And look, that's something that they can say that Carolina hasn't done, is we've made it to the biggest stage in the sport. And, Carolina is going to be looking to get there hopefully sometime in the near future. It could become a lot easier if they expand to 24 teams, but that's a whole nother issue that we can talk about on a different podcast. But, I mean, look, James Madison, the fact that they have that in their back pocket, I think is going to allow them to recruit guys like this, where he really is his only big school offer. And they'll say, hey, look, that's a great offer. There's a chance that you could go there and succeed, but there's also a chance that you could be kind of forgotten about on their roster. Where James Madison, they might look at that as an opportunity. They may say, hey, we value you as one of our top prospects. So I think for Carolina, they've got to show Nori White, and they did over the weekend, that he is priority, but they got to make sure that that message really resonates with him. It'll be interesting to see after that visit with James Madison, first of all, where Carolina's at. This is the choice of Nori White to say, hey, I'm going to wait it out. I'm going to make my decision at the, after we get through the month of June. That could work out well for him. It could also leave the door open for other guys to end up taking his spot at that interior offensive line spot. Carolina's got a lot of guys that are expected to visit this month along the interior offensive line. I mentioned Sincere Wilkerson, who was supposed to be on campus this weekend. I mean, you look at some of the other guys. We just talked about the commitment of Lauifi Tosi and what that means for Carolina along the interior offensive line, getting the first body in there. You've also got Zhao Saojo, who was on campus over the weekend as well. That's another guy that Carolina could be looking to add. Neil Roberts, he's a guy that entered the weekend with his recruitment in a bit of a toss-up, but Carolina was looked at as a potential leader amongst that group of teams that were recruiting him. And so, I mean, there's other guys that are going to be on campus as well as we go throughout the month. Is Carolina going to be willing to hold off and wait for Nori White to make that decision? Or are there guys that are going to want to commit here during the month that they'll say, you know what, we're going to take their commitments over a guy like Nori White because they are wanting to make their decision now? I think that's going to be something that'll be interesting to monitor. Not sure how many guys Carolina's taking at that position, but it feels like with how wide of a net they've cast, I would be shocked if they don't bring in at least 3 interior offensive linemen in this class. Meanwhile, Nori White's teammate, Moreno Fisher, who is listed as an offensive tackle, 3-star offensive tackle, he did not make it to campus after being scheduled to make it there as late as midweek last week. Now, he was a guy that was taken off of a lot of these lists as we got closer to Saturday or closer to Friday. Some of the stuff I saw him, removed on Thursday. I was wondering if that was a name that would pop back up, but it never did. Don't know exactly what happened there. Not sure if they're, going to attempt to reschedule a visit with him. This was a guy that played with Nori White at Independence last year, is a guy that is an in-state prospect that is going to Huff High School, which is one of the best high schools in the state of North Carolina. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not Carolina ends up rescheduling with him. Again, not a lot of big offers for him. I think Carolina is still the only power conference offer that he has on the table at this time. And so that is certainly interesting that he did not make it to campus with Carolina. Could be looking at, just saying to himself, hey, I'd rather go to a school like Charlotte, who I know is in on his recruitment. Some of the other local schools at the group of 5 level and at the FCS level. Maybe he just views that as better opportunities for him. And that's, some of the things that you're going to see with some of the guys that Carolina is recruiting here. They may value them, but at the same time, these are guys that could see more playing time at a school like, a Charlotte or, a couple of other spots that are going after them. I mean, with Moreno Fisher, I thought that was a guy that would definitely end up making it to campus. Some of the other offers that he has, UMass, one of the more recent offers that he had on the table for him. Like I mentioned, Charlotte was one of the ones that jumped in on him over the offseason. So certainly I think he is one of those guys that, Carolina would have liked to get on campus, would have, liked to at least gotten a pitch with. But again, who knows how high they held him on their board when it comes to some of the other offensive tackles that they're going to be bringing to campus over the next handful of weeks. Carolina, yes, only power conference offer for Moreno Fisher, but he does have Charlotte, Coastal Carolina, East Carolina, Liberty. Those are some of the other schools. James Madison, certainly schools that you could be having to keep an eye on. And when I look at it, I'm looking at his story right now. He did receive a couple of recent offers. Howard, Arkansas State, Kennesaw State have jumped in on him here recently. So his recruitment looks like it's going towards either the group of 5, group of 6 level, or the FCS level. So Carolina probably looking at some bigger targets at that position, if we're being honest. That'll be certainly something to monitor over the next couple of weeks. And then the last note that we saw from inside Carolina, Tar Heels remain in good standing with Andrew Rogers, the 3-star edge rusher out of Grimsley High School in Greensboro, North Carolina. If you're looking for someone that Carolina could land in the state of North Carolina, this is probably the guy to have atop the list right now. It feels like Carolina re-entering his recruitment really put them in great standing. And now it's just, can they hold off a team like Clemson, who, right now is currently, going to host him for a visit on June 12th. It is not an official visit. It can turn into an official visit if they officially offer him. But as of right now, he does not have an offer from them. So that will be something to monitor. That is, again, the weekend of June 12th. So not this upcoming weekend, but the weekend after. Feel like if Carolina can get through that without Clemson making an offer, then I think that Carolina is going to officially be the commitment for him. I know there are a couple other FCS schools that are after him there, but it feels like if Carolina is willing to take him, which it seems like they definitely are, then he will choose Carolina over those two. I think it's either FCS programs or, I know James Madison's in there. So it's group of 6 programs that are ultimately chasing after him. Also, before we get out of here, let's do a midweek visitor preview for you guys. As I mentioned, there is only one midweek official visitor that we know of at this point, because it looks like the other official visitor that Carolina was supposed to have is not on campus as of right now. That would be 4-star offensive tackle Dominic Black. He was a guy out of the state of Ohio that Carolina was hoping to bring in. There's a few guys out of the state of Ohio that Carolina is hoping to bring in for official visits. He is not going to be one of the guys that they are going to be able to make a pitch to. It seemed like, this was a guy that popped up on the radar last week, that he was coming to campus. He was going to take a midweek visit to Carolina, which, whenever you host midweek guys, usually that tells you that you're not necessarily in the greatest standing. Usually they're just trying to sort of fit you in to that official visit schedule, where there's other schools that are probably in better regard. He's already taken a visit to Indiana, Kentucky, and Michigan State will also get official visits from him in the month of June. But it looks like Carolina, while they were on the schedule and looked like they were going to get him to campus, that is not happen, or that has not happened as of this evening, and will not happen at any time during this week. And so that leaves 3-star cornerback Joshua Vilmail, who will visit on Tuesday. He will be here Tuesday through Thursday in Chapel Hill. And, look, a guy that just added Carolina to his official visit schedule. Again, midweek doesn't necessarily feel like you're in the greatest standing, but at the same time, I mean, this is really a battle between Florida State, Kansas State, and Kentucky. His brother is a part of the Kansas State roster, so that is certainly something to know here. If I'm Carolina, I'm not putting all my hopes in this basket. I'm not saying that this is my number one guy at the cornerback position. Carolina's got a few other guys that they have been looking at. We told you about Jaden German, who was on campus for Carolina this past weekend. I definitely think there are, some other guys that'll visit later on in the month, like Nathaniel Mensah, who is down to Carolina and Utah in his recruitment, as well as Nazir Pitchford, who I feel a little bit better about from a Carolina perspective. And so, Vilmail is a guy that, hey, let's see if you can make a pitch to him. The one thing that is good is that he is going to be the only guy on campus, so he will be the main focus of this recruiting visit or of this period for Carolina when they're hosting this group of official visitors. It's just going to be him, and so he's going to have all the staff all to himself. He's going to be the focus for Carolina here in the midweek. And so hopefully they can make a huge pitch to him that makes him reconsider where Carolina stands in that pecking order. As of right now, it's tough to figure out who has an edge. That's why, I'll put out the article tomorrow. But we're doing the different categories when it comes to previewing these visits that Carolina is hosting. You, of course, have guys that Carolina is leading for. You have guys that are currently in a situation where their recruitment is a toss-up. And then you got guys that are probably going elsewhere. I put him firmly in that toss-up group because it doesn't seem like anybody has a huge lead at this point. Doesn't seem like there is anything insurmountable with this group. But it does feel like Carolina is going to have to make a pretty strong pitch to him to be able to stand out amongst that group and eventually land his commitment. If anything happens on that front, anything happens on the rest of the recruiting front, we'll have you covered over on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Guys, head over there right now. Check out the article that we got up there about Lauifi Tosi. That was, a nice thing to wake up to this morning. I got to give it to him. I mean, he was a guy that ended up committing at 7:30 this morning. I did not think that a guy that is out there in Goodyear, Arizona, was going to commit that early in the morning. So Josh actually helped me a little bit with the article that I wrote about him, so appreciate him for that. But we got that article up there for you that breaks down everything you need to know about him, go a little more in depth on the prospect that Carolina is landing, including our scouting report of him, which I told you a little bit about earlier when I was breaking them down. So go back, check that out. We would greatly appreciate that. Of course, plenty of other coverage over there on the website. There is, some news that's coming out around the team. Carolina lost the commitment of Taron Dickens. So go back and read that article as to what exactly could be behind that, as well as what Carolina's quarterback room looks like now. And we also put in that article, how big of a loss is that? Make sure you go back and check that out for us. You can also check that out on the last edition of the podcast. Me and Josh broke that down for you guys, just how big of a loss was that for Carolina. And also had an interesting conversation with Andrew Jones a couple of podcasts ago. Make sure you go back and check out that edition of the podcast as well. But in the previous edition to the pod, 676, we talked about where exactly Bill Belichick's hot seat is coming into this year. I think it might shock some people where it's actually at, as opposed to where you may think it's at as a fan. So go back, check out those editions of the podcast, same place that you're watching or listening to this edition of the podcast. And hey, while you're there, wherever you listen to the podcast, make sure you subscribe, or if you're on the Facebook page, make sure you give us a follow. YouTube page, the Twitter page, do the exact same thing. When it comes to everything else, just make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss any editions of the Heel Tough Blog podcast. Also, on the basketball side of things, we've got plenty of stuff still going, plenty of content that's going to be coming at you throughout the offseason, but we are just a couple of days removed from Carolina landing Alexandros Semidurov in their front court. So me and Josh on the latest edition of the Four Corners podcast break that down. Again, you can get that same places that you get this podcast, whether it's on the YouTube page, the Twitter page, or the Facebook page. And then also, if you're a listener to the podcast, in those same spots, wherever you listen to your podcast, all you'll have to do with that is search the Four Corners podcast. But that's going to wrap it up for tonight's edition of the podcast. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening to this edition of the podcast. And as always, go Tar Heels.